Good morning. We're grateful to have you here all on this webinar this morning. My name is Shirley. Um, Lou, I'm from the Asian Pacific Institute on Gender-Based Violence. I'm joined here by Sunny from KFAM in Los Angeles. Before we get started, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat box so we can see where everybody is coming from. Make sure you change the default setting to only send your message to panelists. Zoom kind of makes it so that when you send a message, it just goes to panelists automatically. But if you change the little drop down, you can select all panelists and attendees. Just a couple of housekeeping items as folks trickle in. This webinar will be recorded and will be available online after it's ready. I'll be sending the recording to everybody after the webinar, and you can feel free to share that with those other staff or those in your networks. Your names, so participant names, will not show up in the chat box, will not show up in the recording. Even so, be mindful not to share any names or sensitive information in the chat box, because it is a public chat box, so anybody who's here today will be able to see that information. We do have live captioning today. You would access that by opening another window, another browser window, internet window, and going to the link that I just posted in the chat box. I'm going to post it again. So that's the link for the live captions. And I will be here throughout the webinar to kind of monitor for any tech issues or address anything like that in the webinar. So feel free to kind of message me if you're encountering anything. But otherwise, I will allow Sunny to speak. Just a little bit of information about the Asian Pacific Institute on Gender-Based Violence before we get started. API-GBV is a national resource center on forms of gender violence affecting Asians and Pacific Islanders, Asian and Pacific Islander communities in the US. We work with a wide range of folks, including community-based organizations and shelters like KFAM, lawyers, judges, law enforcement, policymakers, just anybody across the board who's engaging API communities or working to end violence in Asian and Pacific Islander communities. We do not provide direct services. We provide training, technical assistance, resources, and advocacy. So I'm so glad to be here today to learn from those who are working directly in the communities with survivors. I will now pass it over to Sunny. She is the Domestic Violence Program Manager at KFAM in Los Angeles, California. KFAM assists Korean survivors and their families, including many immigrant survivors. So go ahead and take it away, Sunny.
Hello, thank you, Shirley. Hi, my name is Sunny Kim, and I am from KFAM, Korean American Family Services, and I am Domestic Violence Program Manager. So today I am going to talk a little bit about our prevention work with faith leaders and our strategy working with them who are known to be very conservative. So before I talk, there are going to be a Q&A time later, so feel free to ask your questions in the chat box so that we could address it later. Now I'm gonna start my video. So before I start talking about our work with faith leaders, I briefly want to talk about our agency and what we do. So we are Korean American Family Services located in Los Angeles, California. We are founded in 1983 by a group of immigrant women influenced by Dr. Taeyang Lee, who was Korea's first female attorney and women's and children's advocate. Ever since, we've been serving the Korean immigrant community as a family resource center. And now we serve over 7,000 adults and children each year with various services needed in the community with the mission to empower underserved Korean American and Asian Pacific Islander families through culturally responsive programs such as counseling, domestic violence, and foster family program. We have 42 full-time staff and 13 board members, and we get about more than 150 interns and volunteers every year. We have 4 key programs, which is counseling, family violence, child wellness, and Asian foster family initiative. So our mental health services are tailored to the unique needs of Korean American families, adults, and children. So our counselors are all bilingual at least and provide culturally responsive counseling services to individuals and families and couples. Child wellness program, we do promote child wellness and development through our child care food program. Also parenting seminars, children's art workshop, mommy and me classes, and other programs for Korean immigrant parents are available. We do have Asian Foster Family Initiative. We call it AFFI. So our AFFI department launched in 2014, and we recruits, trains, and supports Korean and other Asian Pacific Islanders foster parents. And we strive to provide culturally appropriate homes to Korean API foster children. So KFAM is not just domestic violence agencies, but there are different programs working together in order to support our community. And I think it is beneficial because it is not just domestic violence services that our clients are benefiting from. We had a family with a domestic violence survivor, and because of the severity of the violence in the home and the environment, her kids were taken away from DCFS, Department of Child and Family Services. And because she was Korean baby and Korean child, she was actually under our Asian Foster Family Initiative services, and she was able to be placed in Korean families, and we were able to continue to work with our foster family department in order to provide ongoing support with the family as a whole. And family violence. So at our domestic violence department, I'm just gonna call it domestic violence department. So at our domestic violence department, we offer community-based services to impart Korean immigrant survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault and support their families in achieving safety and stability through education, counseling, and advocacy. We provide various services, including counseling, support group, financial empowerment, and other case navigation services for our survivors to achieve independent lives free from violence. About 95% of our clients are immigrant Korean survivors. So they have extra barriers in order to access to the resources. And they have extra barriers in order to overcome the barriers that they have as an immigrant survivor. Our services are culturally responsive and available both in Korean and English. In 2019, we did provided services to 166 domestic violence and sexual assault survivors with case navigation, counseling, and support groups. And also we assisted over 200 victims of domestic violence and sexual assault with crisis hotline and walk-in services. Also, we do provide services to those who were impacted by domestic violence, such as batterers intervention, anger management, couples family counseling, and child supervised visitation and family law clinics. Now we are going to watch the video that KFAM filmed last year. This video really summarizes our work with faith leaders, and I wanted to share it with you guys today. let's see. Where? Can you guys all, Shirley, are you guys looking at the video?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I'm gonna play it now.
미국의 여행 비자를 받아서 놀러를 오게 되었습니다. 지인과 함께 교회를 방문하게 됐고 교회에서 한 남자를 만나게 됐습니다. 그 사람과 사랑에 빠지게 되었고 결혼까지 하게 되었습니다. 그러던 어느 날 저희는 그날 큰 언쟁을 하게 되었고 저는 너무나도 공포스러웠지만 영어를 잘 못했기 때문에 경찰에 신고를 하지 못했습니다. 저도 남편을 사랑했기 때문에 그냥 참고 넘어가게 되었습니다. 그러고 저의 결혼 생활은 지속이 되었고 또한 아이를 가지게 되었습니다. 임신 기간 동안 또 다른 폭력이 일어났습니다. 남편은 임신한 제 배를 발로 걷어차기 시작했습니다. 하지만 저는 친구 하나 없었기 때문에 연락을 하거나 도움을 받을 수 있는 사람이 없었습니다. 그래서 인터넷을 통해서 한인가정상담소에서 저 같은 사람을 도와줄 수 있다는 것을 알게 되었습니다. 이후 한인가정상담소는 제게 지낼 수 있는 쉘터를 알려주었고 또 바와 비자를 신청할 수 있는 변호사를 연결해 주었습니다.
It was only later they went to KFAM or a shelter or an attorney, but first it was always the faith leader. And that is all of you.
저는 목사 부인이고로 그동안 목회 활동 남편 따라서 살면서 여러 가지 많은 상담을 했는데 지금은 이제 남편이 은퇴한 가운데에 저는 이제 상담을 공부하고 있습니다. 가정 폭력이 한인 사회 속에서 큰 이슈가 되지만 사실은 많은 사람들이 겉으로 드러내지 못하고 표현을 못하고 있습니다. 이유는 우리나라의 문화가 굉장히 그러한 수치 문화, 또한 유교적인 문화, 가부장적인 문화에 의해서 많은 여성들이 많은 피해를 보고 있지만 거기에 대해서 합당하게 자기의 권리를 찾지 못하고 이러한 부분에 수많은 여성들이 해를 당하고 있다는 생각을 하기 때문에 이러한 많은 홍보와 이러한 교육이 너무 필요하다고 생각을 합니다.
항상 꼭 해야 되는 게 있어요. 저희 행사를 하다 보면 한인 가정 상담소
한인 사회에서 가정폭력 문제에 노출되어 있는 많은 가정들을 보게 되는데요. 저는 오늘 세미나에 참석해서 가정폭력에 대해서 조금 더 많이 배우고 저희 커뮤니티 그리고 교회 분들을 어떻게 하면 도울 수 있을지 알고 싶어서 오게 되었습니다.
6년 동안 대학 교수, 남편이 대학 교수, 부인은 너무 못 배운 거예요. 그러다 보니까 여자가
we have a tendency don't want to hear about it because I think most of the time we don't know how to deal with it.
더 나은 미래가 있지만 뭐 예전에 좋았던 예를 들어 90년
아니면은 그 사람이 아예 오히려 더 공격적이고 싸우려고 하고 아니면은 얼어붙어서
When they come in, they usually come 행동 with this feeling of defense of like this doesn't happen in our church, somewhat of this doesn't happen in our family. But throughout the training, I've realized that they start to reflect a lot.
세미나를 통해서 확실하게 알게 된 건 들어줄 뿐 아니라 그 사람들에게 실제적인 도움을 줄 수 있는 방법들이 너무 많다는 거. 그래서 그게 참 유익했던 것 같아요.
I came here today because I recognize the need that a lot of times church leaders are not as equipped as we should be in dealing with situations such as domestic violence and some of the family issues that our congregants go through. I think one good thing is kind of like understanding that this is a universal thing, like other churches go through too. So just knowing that in the back of my mind, it's like, hey, it's not just like my church that's something wrong, but we all go through this, and everybody's in this together. So for me, as a Korean American, it kind of helps me to overcome my shame culture, and also like it would motivate me to actually open it up.
Through these different types of trainings, what we've learned is that Korean faith leaders are now able to recognize domestic violence better. So when they preach on the pulpit or when they talk to their family ministries and they say there's no place for domestic violence in the home, that message trickles down to the congregants. So when they are spreading that message, that is going to have a profound impact long-term on our Korean American culture in ending domestic violence once and for all.
Okay, so now let's go back to the slides. Shirley, is it on?
Yep, we see this.
Okay. All right. So this video, we filmed this video with the support from Blue Shield Foundation. And when the videographer was filming, she was with us for every single event, and she was asking for interviewees, and it was kind of like, oh, she's kind of pain in my butt. But I think the video turned out really well, and I really like this video. I mean, I can't get tired of watching this video. Anyways, so our work with faith community. So as part of our outreach strategy, we've been working very closely with the faith community since 2012 in order to build domestic violence awareness, reduce stigma, and improve their response as first responders. So far, we have trained about 1,200 Korean clergy members through various training events, including 40-hour training, 2-day retreat, 1-day seminars, Clergy Conference, and a lot more. I'm going to talk more details about each event later in this presentation. After years of working with faith community, now we see more referrals from local churches. We see more pastors engaging in domestic violence prevention work and their involvement in prevention as well. I will also talk about this, the impact that we have made in the community later in this webinar as well. So in 2012, KFAM did the community assessment with 102 Korean clergy members and Korean domestic survivors in order to assess Korean faith leaders' knowledge of domestic violence and the need for prevention work with faith leaders. So during the assessment, 8 out of 9 Korean survivors in focus groups said they went to faith leaders before they seek for domestic violence service providers. And 100 of them had negative experience, so they were told their abuse was not serious enough. They were criticized for calling police. They were shamed in the sermon for not supporting their husband. I also had a personal experience, not personal, professional experience with dating violence survivor who had a very bad experience with her pastor, telling her it was her fault choosing a wrong person and that she was responsible for her choice. When she called and we had a pretty long conversation, and I felt like the reason why she called me was not because she wanted services, but because she wanted to be validated and she wanted to be understood, and she wanted to hear someone telling her it is not your fault. She asked this so many times. She asked me over and over if it was her fault. She asked me, is it my fault? Is it really my fault? Over and over. And she kept on crying for quite a long time. And it was really heartbreaking to see this woman experiencing another trauma and guilt just because of her experience with her pastor. Actually, we do meet quite a handful of survivors who have negative experience with faith leaders. Also, if you see the bullet point, in survey of 102 Korean clergy, 60% of them reported they knew of domestic violence among their congregants, yet only 28% referred their congregants out to professional services, such as domestic violence agency, counseling, or police report, to make a police report. Also, 82% of them reported having never received domestic violence training. So when we were talking about prevention and outreach back in 2012, we purposely chose to work with faith community because of the unique role that church has in the community. In Korean immigrant community, approximately 70 to 80% community members are reported to attend church regularly. So for us, working with faith community meant easy way to reach out to our community. Also, church itself serves the community as a resource center. People gather at church and they bring something that they can offer as well. It could be offering, or maybe somebody owns a property, maybe somebody owns a company, and then these resources can be used for our domestic violence and sexual assault survivors. Also, there are many local churches that emphasize serving the community and loving each other. And it could be definitely beneficial for our clients as well when they are sick. When the church could provide some type of resources to the survivors. There is a church that I encountered about a couple years ago, and it was very impressive how they helped the survivor. So this church identified domestic violence victim in their congregation. So they separated her from the abuser, and actually they were able to assist her to get a job and get a permanent housing on their own without any support from domestic violence agency. So this church happened to have a member who owned a property and another member who owned a fashion company. And these members were actually willing to help the survivor, even though it meant giving up some of their profit. So when we, as an agency, DV agency, look for resources like housing, it is not easy to recruit a single landlord who's willing to help. And I'm pretty sure that everyone is on the same page, but this church was able to do that because of this relationship and trust built between church and the church members. Like this, well-trained church can serve the community as a resource center for domestic violence and sexual assault survivors. Congregation often give an absolute trust and respect to their faith leaders. So when faith leaders deliver a message to the congregation about domestic violence and sexual assault, it is much stronger than domestic violence agency educating them. So now I want to talk a little bit about values. When working with faith community, it is important to understand, or any community, it is really important to understand what they value, because it can help us to develop a strategy based on the value that the community holds. So as domestic violence agency, we come from a feminist origin, tend to be progressive, and value social justice. Also, our approach is survivor-centered, meaning that survivor choice and safety is what is important. On the other hand, faith community tends to be very conservative and operates in patriarchal system. Also, they always consider family as a unit. So even with the violence in that family happening, violence happening in the family, instead of considering survivors' safety, keeping a family together becomes their priority. So they often emphasize forgiveness, even in the violent relationship. Also, usually the whole family tends to attend church together. So identifying or helping domestic violence survivors or victims can mean that the church will lose their church members because obviously the batterer is going to leave. And if there's a extended family on the batterer side, obviously they're going to leave the church, right? So they're often very hesitant to actively engage with domestic violence in their congregation. So what are the challenges working with faith community? Since there are more male pastors, they bring conservative male-dominant culture. So usually there are way more female leaders involved with our training events or meetings. But when we look at the group dynamics, we see a few male leaders leading the group or speaking up, and it seemed like other female leaders are okay with it and or follow their lead. So we tend to intervene so that female faith leaders can also share their thoughts and be in the same position as male faith leaders. A lot of faith leaders believe they know everything they need to know about domestic violence already. So I don't know where they get this idea. Maybe it's because they think they are pretty confident about their work with families, but there are some one or two hour seminars that I was in, and I went there as a domestic violence professional, try to provide training around domestic violence, and their reaction was like, what do you know about family? What do you know about this? We've been serving in this community for 10 years, 20 years. We know better about domestic violence or family than you. You know, so they were kind of having this attitude. It was really hard for me to present myself as a domestic violence professional. Also, there are a lot of victim blaming, such as, why are you trying to break up the family? Why did you not obey your husband? Why are you not listening to him, right? And also, faith leaders don't want to break up the family in any circumstances. So also, faith leaders didn't seem to be very interested in our work and kind of consider us as an enemy trying to break the family. Not a lot of faith leaders acknowledge domestic violence happening in their congregation. When church find out about domestic violence in their church, they will want to hide it rather than to open up or to speak up about it. Also, addressing domestic violence can cause messy situation because both partner and extended family often attend the church together. So when they intervene with domestic violence, the partner and their extended family is going to leave the church. And when the church helps the victims, the victim ends up leaving the church anyways in the end because of the embarrassment. So as a result, faith leaders are often hesitant to address domestic violence because it could directly impact their congregation, and their church members can leave the church just because they intervened with domestic violence. So now I am going to talk a little bit about each training event that we have regularly. First, we have Clergy Conference that we hold every other year. So for conference, we invite about 100 attendees to introduce our agency and our services around domestic violence and sexual assault, and to let them know about domestic violence happening in the community. The purpose of this conference is not about educating participants, but it is more about building relationship and increasing the awareness, since there are more participants who come to our event for the very first time. So during our last conference in 2019, we invited professionals in the field, including attorney, police officer, advocate, counselors, and clergy members to share their experience of domestic violence. And also during the conference, we have a guest speaker, panel discussion, and small group session. And what I found effective is to have trained faith leaders share their experience with us. So basically, a couple of faith leaders shared about how our training was beneficial for them and why it was important for them to know and learn about domestic violence. And it was very impactful because they were able to share it from their perspective as a faith leaders. One last thing that I want to highlight is that we give out a lot of promotion items and brochures with our name and numbers. So they remember us as an agency with domestic violence and sexual assault services. Two-day retreat for women leaders. So how we started two-day retreat was after a clergy member back in 2015 with a group of faith leaders who wanted to learn more about domestic violence. So in the very beginning, it used to be a retreat for both male and female faith leaders. However, several leaders pointed out that it is usually faith leaders who work directly with the family. So we changed it to a retreat for women leaders. So our two-day retreat is a training that everyone loves to attend because there are a lot of healing activities that are available. So we do utilize arts and craft and other activities. I remember 2 years ago, one of the participants had a manicure license. So, and I happen to have a lot of nail polish, including gel polish and just nail polish and a lot of stickers and stuff. So we did set up this station just for manicures and pedicures, and they loved this. Also, just two-day retreat is usually done in smaller number, like 15. And there are a few reasons why having a small retreat with female leaders has been beneficial for us. So women faith leaders, they tend to be more progressive and easier to work with. So domestic violence and sexual assault are gender-based violence, meaning that it's women that are usually victimized. So as women, they seem to understand and change their conservative point of view faster. Also, a lot of them experience discrimination and fixed gender role growing up or in their ministry serving the congregation. So they were very aware of patriarchal culture within the community. Also, personally, I think it is just meaningful to provide the space for women leaders just to speak up against the patriarchal culture and system. I just find it very healing and very rewarding for me to provide this type of time and space for them. And also, deeper engagement and sharing is possible. I've seen so many fruitful discussion happening during our two-day retreat. So there were a group of leaders who stayed until like 3 a.m. or 4 p.m. talking about the violence that they experienced or witnessed. And it is very, very powerful when these kinds of discussion continue. So this is why we purposely include a lot of small group discussion during our retreat with group leaders who are trained faith leaders. So these group leaders usually guide the discussion and serve as a bridge during our retreat. We 40-hour domestic violence training. So we also provide 40-hour domestic violence advocate training to faith leaders. I'm pretty sure that most of you guys are very familiar with this one, but this is an intensive domestic violence training for DV advocate, and that includes various topics such as DV 101, legal issues, dating violence, and sexual assault, etc. And our faith leaders, they get to learn about necessary domestic violence resources and how to serve their congregation as first responder. When we first started, we had about 5 participants, all from our Faith Advisory Council. But now I think we have about 25 participants for each training. We hold 2 DV trainings a year, one at our office and one at the seminary school. And both of them are done in Korean. The reason why we started providing this 40-hour training in seminary a couple years ago, I believe it's 2017, because several faith leaders pointed out how important it is for faith leaders to know about stuff, to be trained in domestic violence, and yet there was no training provided at the seminary. So we got this idea from them, and we started offering these trainings to seminaries so that we could provide this training to seminary students. With this training, though, we designed this training so that we can give participants enough time to process the information instead of just giving information itself. I found it very necessary, especially because we are targeting faith leaders. So maybe they have strong reaction towards sexual assault. Maybe they have a very strong reaction to domestic violence or other topics related to domestic violence, right? So it is important for us to provide enough time for them to just process it instead of just giving endless information about domestic violence. I think we have about at least 1 challenging participant for each 40-hour training who has a lot to say about domestic violence. I mean, it is not always a positive, helpful feedback that we hear. It could be a negative too. And also has very strong opinions about everything that we say. But they change over the course of the training, and it is very rewarding to see them change over the course of the training. So now, impact of our work. So last year, we did this evaluation on our work with faith leaders to assess the impact that we had made in the faith community. And it was very interesting to see this report. We implemented same survey as 2012 assessment to really compare how faith leaders' knowledge of domestic violence has changed. So according to the report, there was a slight increase in noticing church members with domestic violence related problems. Also, 43.5% of faith leaders identified domestic violence as the most serious problem that Korean community faces, compared to 15.7% in 2012. Also, actually, in 2012 assessment, 40% of them rated domestic violence as not serious or somewhat serious in the Korean community. So we can see the significant improvement here. Immigrant Korean faith leaders have substantially gained knowledge in various forms of intimate partner violence, changed their attitudes towards domestic violence, learned that their church members are at risk of family violence, and learned ways to offer specific help for their church members when violence occurred. Also, there was a significant change in Korean faith leaders' perceptions towards the most appropriate way to help domestic violence victims between 2012 and 2019. Most markedly, there were significant decrease in praying for victims and advising victims to forgive as a appropriate way to help, while there are notable increase in the importance of referral to family service agencies and report to police and other authorities. So overall, there was a significant impact that our prevention work with faith leaders has made over time. Oh, also, we do see faith leaders increase involvement with prevention and intervention. We had a family of faith leaders who ran a small group at our church just to teach them about domestic violence. Also, we had a faith leaders who shared a message about domestic violence on the pulpit during his sermon. So, and also we see increased referrals from church, and we quite have a lot of faith leaders who wants to volunteer for our events or as an advocate as well. So what does it take to work with Christian leaders? So a lot of time and energy to build trust first before trying to change leaders' beliefs. I'm not sure if you guys caught this, but we start with the surface level and we go deeper. So most of the time, our faith leaders start with our clergy conference or 1 or 2 hour workshop. And our leaders get more involved later on, and it takes at least several months or a year for them to be more engaged with our program. Also, flexibility and patience, handling different perspectives. Sometimes it could be opposing comments as well. Modifying training and outreach material to make it acceptable to Christian leaders. Emphasis on how learning about domestic violence is related to their work and ministry. This is really important because if it is not important to them, if they think this domestic violence, learning about domestic violence has nothing to do with their ministry, if it's not beneficial for them, they're not going to come and they're not going to be willing to learn. So it is really important for us to emphasize how learning about domestic violence and issues of domestic violence is related to their work and how it's going to be benefiting their ministry. Also, you might want to attend events just to make connection. It could be religious conference, it could be prayers and services. So we have our advocates attending religious events just to make a connection, just to go and say hi. And also they bring a lot of brochures with them, and whoever the faith leaders and faith community members they meet, they give out these brochures and this promotion items to them so that they could know about our agency better. So our strategy with Christian leaders. So emphasizing healthy family rather than domestic violence. So I shared earlier that the faith community values the family, and talking about domestic violence could mean breaking the family to them. So we purposely emphasize healthy family rather than violence in the very beginning stage. So we start with how to make family healthy, and we talk about how to make a family healthy, and we move on to unhealthy family, and we could start talking about violence happening in the home. Utilizing group of Christian leaders as bridge. So we have a group of faith leaders working with us, and they are called Korean Faith Advisory Council. So they usually participate all of our training. They plan training events with us, and sometimes they do facilitate some of them, and they give us feedback. So working with KFAC, Korean Faith Advisory Council, has been very effective for us to be able to reach out to faith community better. So also, since we are not we are not part of faith community, I mean, sometimes we miss something, we miss important points, and because the KFAC members, they are all faith leaders, they could give us feedbacks, and they could really give us opinions and thoughts about certain events and even our curriculum material, so that we can make it more suitable for faith community. Providing useful information and resources. For example, it could be one-page sheet with list of do's and don'ts, and numbers to shelters and legal aids, etc. So they could use them when they need it. Having an event that could provide healing for them as well. So for example, it could be 2-day retreat for pastors' wives focused on self-care. So in the community and ministry, so faith leaders are the ones who usually serve their congregation. So the idea of healing and self-care seems to be very appreciated by faith leaders, and they seem to love it. Also, acknowledging their work for families seems very important in order to build this rapport, because they consider us as a progressive domestic violence agency that has opposing values about family. So for them, they are trying to keep the family together. You know, they are trying to build a healthy family for their congregants. But for them, we are the agency who's trying to break the family. You know, and so for them, sometimes they kind of see us as an enemy that has a different thoughts about family, different ideas about family. But us acknowledging their work with family, it could really close this gap, right? And providing self-care activities for them can be used to really appreciate their work. So our 2-day retreat is a very good strategy. It has been a good tool for us in order to really build this deeper relationship and connection with faith leaders. Providing opportunity for them to work closely with KFAM, volunteer for domestic violence battles group, or facilitate small group discussion during 2-day retreat. Also, we do have faith leader who is volunteering as an advocate to provide direct services to domestic violence survivors. So we tend to utilize our faith leaders whenever we have an event or education or training event, because it seems to have a profound impact when it is from the faith leaders. It comes from faith leaders because they are the faith leaders, and they click together. And also, a lot of faith leaders, after they participate in our training event, they want to really help the community. They have this heart to help the community. And when we really have them come and work with us in terms of like providing services to our clients, and they get to really learn and see how serious this domestic violence is in the community. So it's been working really well for us and for them as well. Carefully timing controversial topics that could trigger negative reactions. So I'm not talking about these controversial topics at all, but just hold off until trust is built. And also, we pay attention to facts rather than opinions. So what we learned after years of working with the community is that opinion can trigger a negative reaction. And we found it very ineffective, especially during the earlier stage of building relationships. So I went to the seminar we had this domestic violence training event. And there were a group of I remember there was like 30 faith leaders or 50 faith leaders in the training, and I was talking about domestic violence, and it was going great. And I don't know exactly what I said, but there was something that I said, but definitely it triggered our faith leaders. So what happened after that was they just like kept on raising their hands and start talking about their point of view, and start talking about how we were wrong and how they were right. And it was a mess, right? And obviously it didn't really go well because they were already triggered, and they started to see me threatening, and whatever I said and whatever the word that came out from my mouth was not valuable to them anymore. So instead of like sharing our opinion and focus on our opinion, we pay attention to facts so that it doesn't really trigger the negative reaction from the faith leaders. Also, I forgot to include here, but always provide space and time for one-on-one consultation. So a couple years ago, we were invited to Christian Caucus meeting and had a workshop with 50 faith leaders in Arizona. And when we asked during the seminars and workshop, when we asked questions to their faith leaders, they seemed to be very hesitant to talk about anything. The participant didn't seem like they didn't seem like they're too interested about it, and there was not a lot of participation during the workshop. So I thought they were maybe not ready. Maybe they're not in this ready. They're not really ready, and they need more time, and that was that. But after the workshop, there was a line of faith leaders in the hotel lobby just to have a one-on-one consultation with me and another staff who was with me. So me and my staff, we talked about a lot of things that night with each pastor. So they were able to share their dilemma as a faith leaders when they're trying to help domestic violence. And there was a pastor who asked us, how can I help this family? And then he was able to share how he intervened, and we were able to really challenge him. And there were a lot of fruitful discussion happened between each pastor and us. And I learned that faith leaders are more honest about their congregation and about their ministry when they are in one-on-one conversation with them. So whenever you have a training event, make sure that you do have time for one-on-one consultation. So takeaways: be patient. Building trust takes time. Be humble. These are the respected leaders of the community who hold far more influence and sway than we do. Be open-minded. They may share different value systems and priorities, but ultimately we are all trying to create happier families and healthier relationships. Be ready to be challenged. It can be difficult working with those who may not respect things that you feel deeply about. And also know your limits. Think ahead where you, your colleagues and your agency may have to draw the line. So that is the end of the presentation on my end. And I will take the question if there is any question that you wanted to ask. Should I open the chat box or?
Yeah, thank you. So, I'm getting a little bit of echo. Hopefully you can't hear that. We did have a question that came in a little bit earlier in the chat box about, I think this is about just general programs that KFAM provides. Do you provide batterer intervention group and couple counselings for victims and batterers?
Yes, we do have a batterers group. 52-week batterers intervention. We do run that. But whenever we have a group, we make sure that it doesn't really overlap with so whenever our advocates try to schedule the session with their survivors, we make sure that that doesn't really overlap with the batterers group, so that they don't really have to encounter each other or anything. And also we do provide our department do not provide couples therapy, but if our survivor wants to try to continue this relationship, we do refer them to the counseling department so that they could handle the case, the couple therapy there. But before we do that, we make sure that our survivor have spent long enough time with us so that she has good understanding about healthy relationship and what the violent relationship is. And we we only initiate the couples therapy or referrals when we and our clients agree that it is safe to do so. But we do provide couples therapy and batter's intervention, yes.
Yeah, so it's important to make sure that the client chooses or is willing to participate.
Yes.
Another question that came in, what does forgiveness mean according to the faith leaders, and how is forgiveness possible when someone does harm?
I'm so sorry, I missed the question. Can you repeat that again?
Yeah, of course. What does forgiveness mean according to the faith leaders, and how is it possible when someone does harm?
I know, right? So that's the point that I do not understand. But so so according to them in the Bible, in Christian, it's all about forgiving each other, you know? Just forgive each other. So they are so into it, but they don't understand that there's an active violence going on. So we oftentimes, when they talk about forgiveness, we keep on challenging them. What about the safety? You know, I understand. I mean, I'm not going. Well, I do not disvalue whatever the value that fight leaders have. I acknowledge that. I think it's really important to forgive someone, but how are you going to address the safety of the survivor and family members? That's how we challenge that to our faith leaders. So, yeah. Hope this answered the question.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely tricky to navigate. Another question, can you share any specific modifications you have made to training or outreach materials to make it acceptable to Christian leaders?
Yes, it could be several. We do several things. First of all, we do change our language so that is more suitable for our faith leaders. And also, we do make separate outreach material or training like tip sheet just for the faith leaders, so that we just develop a separate training material just for the clergy members in our material, so the language is more suitable, and there are certain things that they prefer. Like, for example, when they do prefer to have a specific resources available for them so that they could use it whenever they have they encounter victims in their congregation. So we provide that. So we do ask the community, what kind of information do you need? What kind of information do you want to see? And then we definitely put that in there. And of course, as I just shared right now, language is very important too.
Yeah, thank you. What suggestions do you have for starting conversations with faith leaders around consent education? This participant says, I work at a Christian college and I'm struggling with this specific topic because people think consent means we're condoning sexual activity, which isn't part of the school's doctrine of faith.
Yeah, so we've been working with faith leaders around domestic violence for years, and we recently started, not even recent, we started our sexual assault work about couple years ago, 3 years ago. And what we learned is that faith community is way more conservative. They tend to be way more conservative and more victim blaming about sexual assault. So we are having a lot of difficulties addressing sexual assault and consent too. So, I think our sexual assault advocate, who is usually providing this type of sexual assault education to the faith community, can answer this better. But I do talk about, I pay attention to the facts, like how things are happening, how sexual is happening, and and I don't know, I mean, and how things are happening, how people are having discussion around consent too. So it's not, we are not, it doesn't seem like we are forcing the idea of consent to them, but then we're explaining about what this consent is really about and why this is important. And it doesn't really mean that we are condoning sexual activity, but yeah, I mean, it's really tricky. I mean, it is really tricky, but it is really hard to answer because we are still struggling with it. Yeah, I don't know if I answered this right, but yeah.
Thank you. Just reading the comments. Yeah, someone is echoing that. Yes, it's very tricky, but thank you for providing the insight. Can you share some specific modifications you have? I did that one. Sorry. Have any of your staff or faith leaders experienced threats from abusers for helping DV survivors, and how have you addressed that?
I mean, frankly, we didn't have a lot of experience with domestic violence, with the abuser threatening us. I mean, even though our location is not even confidential because we're community-based and everyone knows where we are located, but we didn't really have a lot of experience with the domestic violence abuser threatening for helping domestic violence survivors. There's a one time that actually, it was our survivor who contacted the abuser. So he happened to come to our agency when there was a survivor, when we were seeing the survivor. So there was an event. He and our survivor was like, they're fighting about something, and we had to intervene, and it was pretty intense, and we were very close to call 911. But we were able to, but the good thing about our agency is that we have a bunch of therapists, counselor who is really trained to really work with various people. And we were able to really intervene and calm them down and provide and then give the space for a safe space for the survivors. And also really, the abuser ended up just leaving the agency later on. But yeah, that's how we addressed it. But then we didn't have a lot of threats from domestic violence abuser.
That's great. So somebody says, thank you for the presentation. What are the contents of the batterers group? Which topics are included? And what would be the examples of controversial topics that we need to hold off until we build trust with faith leaders? There's two questions. One is about the batterers group, and one is,
So batterers, we do not have a certain, well, I guess we do have a curriculum. I forgot the name of it, but there's the curriculum that was in English, and we actually did the official translation in Korean. So we has been using that curriculum. I totally forgot the name of the curriculum, but I can totally get back to Shirley about it, and she could let you guys know about it. And also, if there's any topic that we think is really relevant to domestic violence, and if it is necessary for them to learn about, that's how we just include a topic, and then educate based on that. We educate this to our batterers. That's how we do that. And topics, we include DV 101, of course. We have substance abuse, alcohol abuse. We have child abuse. We have communication. We do trainings on very, 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 very diverse topics. So there are so many topics that we're covering, but definitely it is not 52 topics that we're talking about, but then we do have like about 20 to 30 topics that we do talk with our abusers, and we do that. And about the topic, controversial topics, I would definitely talk about and say the LGBTQ. So, and sexual assault too. But LGBTQ, whenever we bring this up, we get a very, very negative reaction from our faith leaders, because yes, LGBTQ is definitely one of the topics that we hold off until we build a trust with faith leaders. Or when we talk about domestic violence within LGBTQ, that's how we approach it. So we don't really talk about our beliefs about LGBTQ, but we focus on domestic violence happening in the LGBTQ community. So we're not, so because we're just literally giving them the information and facts about domestic violence happening in LGBTQ, that does trigger less strong reaction from them, and then we start from that. So we continue talking about the facts about certain topics, and after certain time, they tend to be more acceptive when we introduce this idea of we share our values and we share our beliefs about that. So that's how we address the controversial topics with faith leaders.
And we actually just have a question asking, when you provide sexual assault training to the faith leaders or members of the faith community, do you include LGBTQ? So I think you, addressed that. If yes, can you share a bit on that? In our community, even the faith leaders who are very open to DV issues usually ask us not to share that issue in the session.
Yeah, so for sexual assault, what we find is that even though I feel like now when we go to training events and have an event with the faith leaders, they are more accepted, they're more educated, they're more aware about domestic violence. But for sexual assault, their victim blaming and their negative reaction is far more stronger than domestic violence. And now we are in the very beginning stage in really talking about sexual assault with our faith leaders. So we are working on that to really build their knowledge around sexual assault. So right now we are not really talking about sexual assault happening in LGBTQ community, but I think it takes more. We need more time to really to prepare our faith leaders to be more familiar with the idea of sexual assault before we jump into LGBTQ issues with that.
So it's kind of about building a long-term relationship and trust and a channel to address these issues rather than throwing it all out there at once. I think this one is just a comment, not a question. As an advocate for the LGBTQ community, it has been hard to contact and make connections with the faith community.
It is true. It is really hard. They have really, really strong reaction to LGBTQ community, and it's been very challenging for us to really address that too. But when we talk about domestic violence, sexual assault, or happening in LGBTQ community, when we talk about how the domestic violence, sexual assault services are needed for LGBTQ survivors, they agree with it. They might not agree with this idea of the LGBTQ, they don't really agree with it, but they agree with that even LGBTQ survivors need domestic violence, sexual assault services. So that's how we've been approaching to our community with our faith leaders that about LGBTQ community. And when we talked about it, when we approached to our faith leaders this way, it has been working better for us.
Yeah, I think this topic is so hard. I hear over and over again, we ran a listening session last year for LGBTQ API advocates and survivors, and one of the things we kept hearing is that as an API LGBTQ person, as somebody who's in both of these identities and a survivor, it's so hard to find spaces where I can show up with both of my identities. I have to either prioritize being an API person, an Asian Pacific Islander person, or I have to, leave my API community and prioritize my LGBTQ community. So it's so difficult where somebody can be kind of their whole selves and bring their whole selves into the, into spaces. So let me look. There was one in the chat box from a little bit earlier. I think this one is about general services at KFAM. Do you do mental health counseling? Is mental health counseling provided by KFAM staff or referred out?
The mental health service is provided to our staff?
I think to survivors. They're asking if KFAM staff provides the mental health counseling, or do you refer that out?
Yes, I mean, we have a counseling department. So, I mean, if there's an intensive counseling services needed, we do refer them to our counseling department. And all of our counselors are trained in domestic violence too. So they understand the domestic violence. So when they see the survivors, they're actually equipped to provide services to them as well.
Great. This person says, I've worked with clients who file and are granted restraining orders against the other party, but later on face challenges enforcing the order if the other party is a member of the same church. Have you discussed scenarios like this with church leaders?
Yes, we do discuss scenarios like this with church leaders a lot. So the modifications, and when we talked about curriculums, so when we have conversation with our faith leaders, they always ask for what can we do? Like, can you teach us how to do it? Can you teach us how to manage the situation? They want actual practical steps from us, like how to help DV survivors. So we do talk about the scenarios like this a lot. How are you going to address there's a restraining order? How are you going to address when there's a domestic violence? Try to look for the survivors of domestic violence. So it is really important to prepare scenarios like this, so that we could all discuss with the faith leaders and kind of prepare them and kind of educate them around it.
Let me see. I think that was all the questions that we had. If anybody has additional questions or just reflections or comments and things like that, feel free to share. I'm just going to scroll up in the box to make sure we didn't miss anybody. Or if anybody has experience working with faith leaders in their own communities, I think we'd all love to hear what you've experienced. I don't see any additional questions that I missed, I hope. Here, okay. Do you have any action plans for this October Domestic Violence Awareness Month with faith-based leaders and community?
No, not yet. I know that it's October, but we are trying to figure out how we could do it creatively, because everything is virtual now and our office is closed because due to COVID. So we're trying to figure out how we could do creative DV Awareness Month activity. We're still figuring out, but not yet.
Yeah, so are we. It's so difficult because everything is on Zoom and virtual to kind of do the same types of things. And especially with your community events, how to create that space and that connection with people still. Do you have any plans as far as the next steps in this faith-based program? Or, are you planning any additional meetings, any additional events or outreach and things like that?
Now our focus is to, because the COVID, I don't think we are gonna start any in-person events right now. So what we are doing right now is we actually created this YouTube series for faith leaders. So this, I think I filmed about, there's 5 videos that we filmed, and it is dedicated to the faith leaders. So because in-person training is kind of hard and possible, even though we do every event virtually, we just started this YouTube series that we dedicated this to our faith leaders so that they could have access to our training material. So, but this YouTube video series is, the topics is not just about domestic violence, it's just about talking about domestic violence, but it focuses on how as a faith leader can really be involved in our domestic violence movement. So we start with, obviously DV 101, right? What is domestic violence? And also there's a topic about how can you identify domestic violence victims in your congregation, right? And there is a topic about how can you intervene when you see domestic violence victims in your congregation, and also there's how can you participate in the prevention work. So and there's another video just for the resources that could be beneficial for faith leaders to know. So we are creating this YouTube video series, and if not every video is up yet, but we are working on to really uploading this video series on YouTube.
That's awesome. I would love to help share those videos when they're ready. Or whenever you're ready to share them, I think.
Yeah, but the thing is that our video are in Korean, so they have to be Korean in order to understand the video. But I'm happy to share that though.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah. One other question: I'm having a hard time to recruit faith leaders for our DV seminars. Do you have any suggestions for me to let them know that discussing DV is also important and is related to their work?
So it is really hard. When we struggled really hard in the very beginning, because when you go there as a new person and also from domestic violence agency, and they're not really interested in domestic violence in general. So even like 2012, when we started this movement and this work with the faith leaders, we started really small. And it's okay, right? It's okay. It took us 8 years for us to be able to see some results and see some impact in the community. So it is okay. It is okay to struggle, but what I suggest is to find a few leaders who show interest and work with them. Because for us, working with faith leader has been very beneficial because they are faith leaders. They know how to approach to them. They also have their acquaintances, their friends who are faith leaders, so they could bring people in. So, and they were part of this caucus, and they're part of this coalition, faith leader coalition or network, so that there is another network that we can create by working with faith leaders. So identify the small number of faith leader who is interested and focus on them and kind of build a network and relationship using your relationship with them. That has been beneficial for us.
And do you want to talk about the tip sheet?
Oh yes. Oh, I forgot. So there's a tip sheet that I made, and it's a little size tip sheet that really summarizes our today's presentation. And Shirley is gonna send you guys pretty soon after this webinar, right?
Yep. So I'm gonna be sending the recording for this webinar, the slides, and the tip sheet, along with any resources that are mentioned, like the video, in case you wanted to share with those in your networks or your contacts or anybody who might find it helpful. So I will be including that tip sheet in there. Watch out for an email from me when the recording is ready and processed, so maybe in 2 or 3 days or so.
Thank you.
The another question. Has there been a biases and beliefs training for faith leaders to learn how to put aside their biases and personal beliefs aside to better help all domestic violence and sexual assault victims?
From our agency, we do not have a separate training about biases and beliefs, but we definitely address it during our 40-hour training and another training as well. Because so we always address, because we are aware of their values and their beliefs and the biases that they have towards the domestic violence or sexual assault survivors. So there's like, we do prepare like little one-page sheet, like truth and false, and or other activity sheet that we could address it with our faith leader that we are working with. But we don't have a separate training just for the biases and beliefs.
So that's all the questions that I see. I'm going to leave it open a couple more minutes in case anybody has any additional thoughts or questions to share. And I am going to put my, my contact information in the chat box.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And Sunny's.
Yeah, I have my contact information up, so.
Awesome, I don't have mine. Trying to figure out this Zoom chat thing where it wants to send to only a couple of people. Yeah. So you see on the screen Sunny's contact information, and I just put mine in the chat box in case anybody needs to get in contact or has any additional questions. I see a lot of folks saying thank you to you for sharing this presentation.
Thank you, Shirley.
Yeah, so I don't think, looks like we've answered, or you've answered all the questions that have come in, and I don't think there's any additional ones. So we can go ahead and close a little bit early, just 5 minutes earlier. So I want to thank you for sharing. I think this is a topic that a lot of people are interested in learning more about and getting involved with their faith communities, but don't really know how, and don't really know you know, how to make the inroads there. What are the steps and what are the considerations? So just thank you for, I love your delivery. You're just so matter of fact and calm. So just want to say thanks, and to you and all the folks at KFAM for doing this work and being here today to share this work with us. And I think unless there's anything else, we can go ahead and end the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you again.